All right, folks, we are live. Well, no, we're not live. This is recorded. Let's be serious here. Episode 231. We're going to be talking about the debate. I think it's debate number 9. Democrats came out swinging. It was quite fun, so I do want to talk about that. We're also going to be talking about Medicare for all. Our very own Justin Haskins was featured in a clip on last week tonight with John Oliver. So we're going to dissect that for a little bit. And if we have time, and we never do, we're going to be talking about a crazy proposed bill of the week at the end on episode 231 of the In the Tank podcast. As always, folks, I am Donald Kendal, your host of the podcast. Joining me today, I have Justin Haskins. He is here at the editorial director at the Heartland Institute. How are you, good sir?
I'm doing well. That's the politically correct thing to say right now.
Well. Fantastic. Yes. Okay. We have Jim Lakely, Director of Communications here at the Heartland Institute. And you, how are doing?
English is my first language, so I hope you understand what I'm saying. But I'm doing just great. It's Casual Friday and enjoying life.
Wait a minute. There's Casual Friday? No one told me about that.
Apparently.
Well, you have casual every day, Justin, since you work from home. So
you don't know that. Maybe I dress up every day. You don't know.
What you folks don't know, especially those that are only listening to audio, is Justin doesn't wear pants when he records this. Also joining us in the dark corner of the office, we have producer extraordinaire Andy Singer. You're not supposed to put yourself on camera. And so anyways, gentlemen, usually when we have these Democratic debates that seemingly happen every week now,
wait a second.
What?
Where's Isaac?
Oh, I don't know.
Where's the fracking guy?
He said that he said that he wasn't going to be here for some reason.
Oh, all right. Well, good enough. All right, continue on. Sorry.
Yeah, well, he shouldered the weight of last episode when you were gone. Maybe that's the first thing we can talk about. So he's resting from carrying the show last week, talking about fracking. So Justin had miraculously, let's put him on the spot, didn't show up last week.
That's true, Donald.
So,
well, so what, you want an explanation?
You're going to explain yourself?
You want an explanation? Okay, so here's the thing, and I think a lot of our listeners can relate to this situation, at least to some extent. I think what I experienced last week, because I do consider myself a victim, I think what I experienced last week is like pretty indicative of what's happening in America, in a divided America that we're living in today. So essentially what happened was I was scheduled to go on the podcast.
Yeah. We all know that part.
Right. Right before the podcast was about to start, my wife, who is amazing in every way, who's amazing in every way, she's been working from home a lot lately, which has been both fun and challenging. And she's been working from home a lot lately, and she got into this whole thing about Bernie Sanders. And
can I pause you right there for 1 second? Further context: this is last week, Friday, which is Valentine's Day. Continue, Justin.
Yeah, this is on Valentine's Day. We started talking about Bernie Sanders, and then we started talking about single-payer healthcare, and then we started talking about whether Bernie Sanders will actually be able to achieve any of his goals, and then we started talking about socialism. And before you know it, there was screaming and things being. Oh yeah. Well, no. Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. For sure. Yeah. Yep. Without question. Screaming. There may or may not have been things thrown in the apartment. Yeah.
Dude.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah. You know what? This is less of an explanation of why you were not on the podcast, and more. I'm actually more angry that this wasn't on the podcast. I mean,
yeah, I know. We should have just turned the camera on and let you guys watch. That's a good point, because that's all we would have had to do. A lot of this happened in this vicinity behind me. But basically, don't worry, America. The marriage is still strong. Everything's fine. What people need to understand is that this is this is like relatively common. It's just the timing of it. It just was not good.
Yeah.
But this is not something that hasn't happened 1,000 times before over the past decade. So
the marriage is strong until you told all of our listeners about the fight. So
thankfully,
you might recheck that.
No, because thankfully my wife does not watch this show or listen to the show.
So yeah, but on Twitter, once Team Justin and Team Justin's wife starts trending, then
yeah, that's not going to be good.
The cover is not going to
be good. I already bought myself. I'm already all set. Like I've already squared things away because
you bought a tent so you could live out in the backyard.
No, actually. I got some good credit because we did go out to a very nice dinner after the fact, which went very well. And then Donnie bailed me out by helping me with some graphic design needs that she had. So
help, man.
That also helped. So I'm good. I'm out of the doghouse now.
Awesome. Out of the doghouse and in the tank with Jim and I.
That's right.
Awesome. All right.
Captain Segue there. Excellent.
Yeah, he's really good at that.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. So this is off the rails. All right. So there was a debate that took place. Was that Wednesday night? I think it was Wednesday night. And
whatever.
It was, again, like as I was saying here when I was trying to start this this segment, is that usually I don't care. They've been boring. I watched the first couple because I thought, there was like 15 people on stage. They're going to start swinging at each other, really jockeying for position. And they were boring. They were so boring. So I was not planning on watching this. I am in like several different group chats with various people, friends, family, work colleagues. And I get a text message that's like, oh man, are you guys watching this? Like this debate, like the gloves are off, man. So I was like, all right, great. This is what I've been waiting for forever. And it made sense to me. We're two primaries in, like people are starting to not be patient anymore and really go at each other. So I flipped it on and it was great, folks. I am telling you, this was the debate to watch. I even joked with my wife who I made watch it last night. I was like, you want to watch it again? Just because it was so entertaining. So Justin, Jim, you watch it?
Go ahead, Jim.
Well, I didn't watch it live. I'll say that.
Oh, you missed that.
I did get your guys' text. I was watching other things with my wife. That was certainly more, which I thought I should say I thought was going to be more entertaining than yet another boring Democratic debate. But I thought it was certainly more entertaining. They were going at each other in real ways. Of course, the cliche that Elizabeth Warren scalped and cut down to size, little mini Mike and all of that stuff was all going out there. What I actually found really interesting in retrospect was that, all the fireworks were directed toward Michael Bloomberg and not at Bernie Sanders. Despite all the money that Bernie has paid to get himself into the debate and all the other stuff, the front runner is still Bernie Sanders. If Elizabeth Warren wants to be the Democratic nominee, she needs to take down Bernie Sanders. If Pete Buttigieg wants to be the nominee, he has to take down Bernie Sanders. And of course, Amy Klobuchar is not going to be the nominee, so she doesn't matter. But, they directed all their fire at Michael Bloomberg, which, you pick on the new guy, I guess. That's kind of the way it goes in high school, and politics is high school in this country at this point. But it didn't make any sense. None of these candidates advanced themselves any further down the road to becoming the nominee, except Bernie Sanders. So, if you wanted to get the nomination, it might be fun picking on the little new guy in the debate, but it's not getting you anywhere.
I think that's a good point. If you do watch like the certain metrics, whether it's like the Real Clear Policy aggregate poll, or like you sent me like the betting odds from some website or whatever, like Bloomberg is trending upwards, like with a bullet. Like he is doing pretty well. And now, obviously, he's just dumping just buckets of cash into this. So if people are kind of looking at him as like the wild card, I can see that why they would kind of feel threatened by that. And before we actually get to some of these like main points, and first off, Justin, do you watch this? You just catch highlights?
No, I watched a good portion of it. I didn't watch the whole thing. Okay. I agree. I disagree a little bit actually with what Jim said. I think it makes sense that they went after Bloomberg because Bloomberg was trending upward. They don't have any reasonable candidates in the race at all at this point. And Bloomberg was viewed as being sort of a reasonable guy by some, even though he's really not, but he was viewed that way. And the thing that really scared the heck out of them is the fact that he's got way, way, way more money than any of them could ever dream of. And he's spending it. Like he's actually spending that money. I mean, he has spent somewhere in the neighborhood of like $400 million on political advertising. $400 million. And he's only been in the race for a few months. Yeah, he's only been in the race for a few months. And so they look at him, I think, and they say, if this guy keeps trending in this direction and he can outspend all of us combined, whatever he feels like it, just by reaching into his back pocket, then we've got to destroy him now while we have a chance. And they did. They destroyed him. I mean, he looked horrible. He looked so bad. And
at multiple points during this, he looked horrible. But like, first, let me kind of justify my excitement for talking about this, because I always say on here that like I don't like politics and that I actually like talking about policy. And you're gonna say like, well, you say that, but you're over here getting all giddy talking about Bloomberg or whatever and Bernie Sanders, and it's true. This was kind of an outlier here. This is the one moment where I was like, this is actually really interesting. And also in the Trump era, that also kind of boosts everything up a little bit. But so starting off, Elizabeth Warren immediately goes after Bloomberg and kind of quoting some of his not so good quotes. So that was pretty funny. But like once it got into like some of the meat of the things where like, you know, everyone kind of knew that they were going to go after this. One was like the NDAs, the non-disclosure agreements that are in place over like some of his like lawsuits that have happened in his under his company or whatever. I texted the group and I said, this is like sharks going after a bucket of chum. Like it was ruthless. It was ruthless. I mean, did you catch that part, Jim?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. Actually, I thought that was one of the more entertaining and good points that were made. When Elizabeth Warren, she really gets all the credit in retrospect, getting all the credit for attacking Michael Bloomberg. And she started off attacking him, describing what people might have thought was Donald Trump as somebody who calls women names and is a billionaire and is a lout. And no, I'm actually talking about Michael Bloomberg. Oh, sick burn. That was really funny. And then she goes after, and I think it's a legitimate point. The Democrats, and again, I think the Democrats are still thinking in 2016 terms. They went after Trump on, his problem, treating women poorly and all this stuff, and the whole story and the Access Hollywood tape and all that they thought would take him down, and it didn't take him down. Yet they're still going back to that to take out Michael Bloomberg. Now that might work in a Democratic primary, but the general electorate did not care about Donald Trump's so-called problems in those areas, because that was already baked in the cake. They already knew that about Donald Trump, and they still liked him, and they still voted for him. So maybe it makes a little bit of sense to go after Michael Bloomberg on those points, because the Democratic Party is, very woke. They're very Me Too. And, maybe a lot of people didn't know that about Michael Bloomberg. Michael Bloomberg thinks he's this world famous person. He was the mayor of New York. Donald Trump is a global celebrity and was before he ran for president. Michael Bloomberg is just an extremely rich guy with a huge ego who is the mayor of New York and has some really terrible ideas and has, treated people in his company, apparently, allegedly, according to lawsuits, pretty poorly. Well, that's not going to transfer very well across to a general electorate, although it might work among Democratic voters.
Yeah, I don't know. Like my main takeaway of that whole interchange was like, he basically brought a couple of knives to a firefight. Like these are like career politicians that are aiming for you, this newcomer guy. And I know that he was mayor of whatever, right? But it got ruthless. And like you could just tell how unpolished he was by his answers to this. So they were going after these NDAs, and he's like, he said something about how like, none of those had to do with me, except for maybe like somebody didn't like a joke I made. And Everyone just starts booing him. And then Biden hops in on him. And at certain points, man, they panned over to him and just looked at his face just while he's taking this. And I'm just thinking, he's got to be thinking in his head, I spent $400 million on this campaign already. And it's nothing. And then it goes to break like shortly after that segment. And I texted you guys and I said, man, like, is he taking this break to call up his staff and say, hey guys, stop running ads and start packing your bags? Like, it was that bad. It was that bad.
It was really bad. And I don't see how he recovers from this. I mean, it's over. It's over for him. That was his big chance. There was probably no chance for him really anyway because of those issues. Eventually he would have had to address those issues. And he's in a party that I mean, they think it's impossible to believe that someone who is accused of something like anything inappropriate at all in the workplace is innocent. And I don't know if he's innocent or not. That's not the point. The point is they're going to say he's guilty, and anyone who defends him is going to be labeled also a person who is a misogynist and doesn't care about women and whatever. And so ultimately he was totally screwed. It just shows how stupid he is for even trying to run and to spend all of this money. It makes absolutely no sense at all. And if he really wanted to make the world a better place, he would have been better off just taking that $400 million and giving it to charity, not trying to, instead of television advertisers. And that's pretty much where it all went.
Yeah, there was another couple of moments with him that just really came off as just like unpolished politician. There was one point where they were going after him for being a billionaire, because that's the worst thing that you could be on the stage at a Democratic primary, is having a lot of money. And at one point he says, instead of like having the politician speak or whatever, where it's just like, I came from this background and, I was able to grow this business into what it is today. And in the meantime, employing all of these people or whatever. No, he didn't say that. He said, well, I earned my money, or whatever, which was met by just a thunderous amount of boos. Like, it was just every step of the way, man. He could not get out from underneath himself. And even the NDA thing, he could have tossed it back on them and being like, you're trying to reopen old wounds, right? For like political gain. Like, how dare you? He could have said that. But instead he starts saying like, oh, maybe I made a joke or something, but hey, it was just like, you could, again, standing next to like 3 other career politicians, it just came off so bad.
Well, let me say on the NDA thing, it definitely came off bad, and worse than I told a bad joke or something, was he was trying to sell the idea that even the women who signed those NDAs would rather keep it quiet. I doubt that very much.
Sure.
But he actually had a good turnaround on the wealth issue with Bernie Sanders, which I thought was awesome. When he said, I think this is about as close to the accurate quote as I can get, but he said, basically, what a country we live in. The country's most famous socialist is a millionaire who has 3 houses. And Bernie got very indignant about that, of course. And he explained that he has 1 house in Washington, D.C. And Bloomberg said, that's one of the problems. Then he says, I have my house in Vermont. And he said, great, that's great. And then he says, then I have a summer camp. Wait, forgive me, I have a summer camp. That summer camp is a 4-bedroom, mansion on a lake somewhere. That's not a summer camp. He's not dragging a trailer behind his pickup truck and parking it somewhere and going fishing. I mean, come on, this is so hilarious. I thought that was awesome and good for Bloomberg for throwing Bernie Sanders' wealth in his face.
Even worse than that. No, because Bernie Sanders' response was worse than that. And his response was like, oh, hold on, let me explain that. I've got, 1 house in where I work in Washington, D.C. I've got 1 where I live back in Vermont. And like a lot of people, I have a summer camp, or whatever. Forgive me for that.
Right.
It's just like a lot of people. What?
A lot of people in Vermont, he said a lot of people in Vermont have summer camps. And I doubt they have 4-bedroom summer camps on a lake.
came off as so elitist.
Yeah.
For the populist, socialist, grassroots guy.
Yep.
Like a lot of people, I got a summer home or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, what? I thought that was the worst moment.
As someone who has spent a massive amount of time in Vermont, whose half of my family is from Vermont, who knows many people who still lives in Vermont, I don't know anyone who has a summer camp in Vermont. Not anybody, not a single person. And even if I did, they wouldn't have it, as Jim said, a 4-bedroom mansion on Lake Champlain in one of the most beautiful parts of Vermont, where only the rich people from not Vermont but New York City buy their houses in the summer. You don't have a summer house. Think about this. Just think about how stupid this is. So I'm supposed to believe that people in rural Vermont is all rural. There's no cities in Vermont. Not really. Not of any consequence. That they all have summer houses in the same state where they live. That makes no sense. You know who has summer houses in Vermont? People from Manhattan. That's who have summer houses in Vermont. So yeah, absolutely. And guess what? You know where Bernie Sanders is from? Not Vermont. He's from New York. So this is the whole point. He has no concept whatsoever of how any of this stuff works. He is an elitist. In fact, he's made millions of dollars as a politician, not actually selling products that people care about, not actually trying to make the world a better place in any real sense. He's become rich beyond the vast majority of people's imaginations. And then he has the gall to stand there and act as though this is just a common thing. Yeah, of course we have 3 houses, one where I work, one where I live, and then one where I live in the summer. Like, sue me. Yeah. It's like, you know what, man, that's fine. Good for you. Right. But don't go around telling the rest of us that you're the man of the people here and that, you're you're some socialist, self-sacrificing, I care about the world kind of person. No, you're flying around on private jets like all the other socialists around the world. You're living in 3 houses. You've got multi-millions. You are getting all this money from the taxpayers for doing what exactly in Washington, D.C.? You're a scumbag just like the rest of them. And I just wish that it's amazing that the Democratic Party is locked in, just a regular Democrat, as locked in as they are on those issues. It's amazing that they've allowed him to have a pass and treat him like he's a man of the people. Give me a break.
I think Justin's point is perfect, and you made it there, and I think you skipped over it too quickly. It is in socialist countries and communist countries that the elite, the political elite, get to live like that. They get, in Russia, they have their dachas, and then they have their government homes, and they have all these other places. And Bernie Sanders, a socialist, in socialist and communist countries, the elite get to live like that, while the rest of us live in poverty. And at least in a capitalist system, an elite like Michael Bloomberg earned his elite status by becoming a billionaire with a net worth of $60 billion. $60 billion. That is more wealth than any of us could even imagine. It dwarfs the billionaire that Donald Trump is as far as his net worth. But at least Michael Bloomberg earned it in a capitalist society by providing services that people want, namely his Bloomberg News service and then his other investments where he's helping grow other businesses. But Bernie, as a socialist, it's so typical. He would get to live like a king while the rest of us live in relative poverty.
Yeah. So again, we're just kind of talking about like this reality TV show, which is, who's going to become the Democratic nominee. And the best part about that game show is there were 6 people on the stage. 5 of them get to lose. So that's the fantastic part about this. That's a little silver lining for sure. But so we're going to get to policy because, they talked about Medicare for all. And I do want to dedicate the meat of this podcast to that topic. But there was another bit of politics that happened during it, which was my absolute favorite part of the entire debate. And that surrounded Klobuchar, right? So Klobuchar was getting heat. I guess recently there was some type of town hall or whatever where she was like asked who the name of the Mexican president was, the president of Mexico was. And she couldn't figure it out, right? She attributed this to a brain fart, but apparently she was asked, like, so you don't know? Given time to figure it out, and she just couldn't, right? So she was kind of raked over the coals for this on this debate, whatever. I don't know why this has to do with policy, but they were doing it. And so she goes into this whole thing about how like everyone could be forgetful at times and she's got a lot of things going on or whatever. And, you know, I just want to send an apology to Manuel Lopez Obrador. Literally looks down at her notes to say it. It was the funniest thing in the world. My wife is the one that caught it. She's like, she looked down at her notes. I was too busy texting with the group chat or whatever, so we rewound it, and I watched it. I laughed so hard that I had to pause it. It was that funny. I don't know if you guys caught that one, but holy moly, like that should be a GIF. That was great.
Yeah, I mean, they're all just a bunch of phonies. I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, they really are. None of them actually care about most of these issues. They're all just a bunch of phonies. She's maybe the biggest phony of them all, I think, potentially. I personally don't care whether you can remember the name of some head of state somewhere. I'm sure there's all sorts of questions that I could come up with that would stump all of these candidates. And I'm sure they'd come up with questions that would stump me and whatever. But it's stupid on the surface that they care about this. As Donnie said, like, where's the policy and all of that? On the other hand, though, it is pretty hilarious to watch them just snipe at each other over whatever they can possibly find that's wrong. And the best part about this was the underlying tone, if we're going to get really like deep into the liberal weeds here, because they love their dog whistles and their like secret racism and all of this stuff. They love to talk about that. That's clearly why this was supposedly important. See, she's a white woman from the Midwest, and she was asked I believe it was in an interview or something about the president of Mexico. And because she didn't know, she clearly doesn't care about Mexicans. Sure. That's what this is all about. And I believe, if I remember right, the person who asked her the question in the debate was a Latina, if I remember right.
Yeah.
So all of this was clearly, the underlying tone here is, you're just like a non-woke Midwestern racist white woman, and you don't really care about Mexico. If you cared about Mexico, you would know who the president is. You know, that was really the underlying tone here. And that's why she was so defensive about it and why people care about it at all. And it took another white woman to bail her out, which is interesting.
Perfect transition to what I was going to say next, because the other kind of underlying like politics that were at play during this entire thing is basically the jostling to see who's going to be the nominee, but also who's going to be the VP, right? So I think like a lot of people realize that Klobuchar doesn't really have a chance at becoming the nominee, but she's a very valuable piece coming from that Midwest that could fit next to a Bernie Sanders or an Elizabeth Warren as that VP to kind of round out the ticket, right? So Elizabeth Warren jumping to Klobuchar's defense there, I think was a perfect example of that, right? On the other side of the spectrum, Buttigieg, who is currently in first place, if he pulls off the miracle and actually becomes the nominee, he doesn't need Klobuchar. He needs one of the more fringy ones, like Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders. So that's why he didn't go hard after them. He went super hard after Klobuchar, like the entire time. It was basically his his punching bag that he was able to go to. So like those little things, are interesting to like a politics wonk. And they're absolutely gross to me. But Jim, I don't know if you caught that kind of subtext that was going on one way or the other, or I'll give you the kind of the final thoughts on this whole debate thing before we move on.
Okay, I mean, just with Buttigieg, I think Buttigieg goes after Klobuchar because he thinks whoever the nominee is, and it's going to be Bernie, he's going to need help in the Midwest. He needs a normal person on the ticket, and Pete Buttigieg could fit that role. Obviously, Klobuchar could fit that role, so he wants to take her out. So we'll see how that shakes out. But I don't consider Buttigieg the front runner.
No.
Bernie is going to clean up in Nevada, and we'll see what happens in South Carolina as all of Biden's. We haven't even talked about Biden, and we shouldn't, because he's finished, and South Carolina will finally finish him off. But what I actually found, just to kind of wrap a bow around this, I suppose, is go back to Bloomberg here, as Justin had noted, he has spent $400 million, maybe $500 million. And you may think he's out of it because of this debate. I'm telling you, he doesn't think he's out of it because of this debate, because he is willing to spend probably up to $2 billion or more on his campaign. And this is an amazing thing. He has spent, I think Donald Trump spent $300 million on his presidential campaign in 2016. Michael Bloomberg has spent more than that, and he has not won a single primary. In fact, he's not even on the ballot in Nevada, where they had the debate. He is not on the ballot in South Carolina, which is the primary after that. He is betting everything on Super Tuesday, which I believe is March. Is it March 3rd or something? I think it's March 3rd.
First week of March.
First week of March. So the first Tuesday in March is March 3rd. He's betting everything on Super Tuesday, and he is very unlikely. He's not going to sweep Super Tuesday. The latest I saw is that perhaps he could win Virginia, but he's probably not going to win any states. And by that time, he will have spent over $500 million on a campaign that has achieved exactly almost nothing when it comes to delegates, which is what matters to get the nomination. And when you see all that spending like that, it brings me back to the Citizens United case, which, if listeners might remember, there was a nonprofit group, a production company called Citizens United, run by David Bossie, that had a film critical of Hillary Clinton. And, the courts said that you can't run a film critical of Hillary Clinton in the middle of an election because that is illegal political speech. So, of course, it was overturned by the Supreme Court, and every single one of those Democrats on the stage, one of the first things they would pledge to do is to appoint members of the Supreme Court who will reverse Citizens United. Now, Citizens United spent a tiny fraction of what Michael Bloomberg is spending right now for his political speech. But if you're a corporation or you make a movie critical of Democrats, you need to be silenced. In fact, your speech is illegal and maybe you should go to jail. This is one huge contradiction about what the Democrats, they have no dedication to free speech. They'll let Michael Bloomberg spend anything he wants, $2 billion to speak politically before an election, but they won't let ordinary citizens gather together to form a production company, to fund a production company to produce a film critical of Hillary Clinton or any other Democrat. I think that's something people should really remember as they watch Michael Bloomberg just burn through money like nobody's ever seen.
It's pretty incredible that $400 million, like, again, like, these figures are like really hard to like grasp fully, but like the budget of the Avengers was like 200 million. So like this guy could just like make like Star Wars Episode 10, Bloomberg should be your president, and release it. It's insane. But whatever. I don't know. Hopefully this gets even more interesting. So I think there's another debate coming up that next week before South Carolina. So hopefully the gloves will be off in that one as well, and we'll talk about it. But I do want to move on. We got to talk about Medicare for all. So last week tonight with John Oliver was trending, and it was because he did like a 20-minute segment dedicated to Medicare for all. And just seeing that was trending on like Twitter on like Sunday and Monday, I was thinking like, all right, yeah, maybe we should talk about that. I don't know. We talk about Medicare for all the time. But maybe we should talk about it. And it wasn't until I think Wednesday night I get a text message from a friend of mine that was said, "Hey, Justin was featured in that segment." And I was like, well, that settles it. We are talking about it. So you were included, Justin. I don't know if you saw yourself here, but you were included in the segment basically highlighting the crazy opponents of Medicare for all, where they have you said, quote, literally 90% of hospitals will go under tomorrow. So you and the other kind of talking heads that they had of you, they make it sound crazy because A, they're taken out of context, and B, they're played over a laugh track. So Justin, just you don't have to defend that comment just yet because we'll get into some of the meat of this stuff. But how do you feel being featured on HBO's show? Pretty cool.
Yeah, sure. I said to somebody, because I've had 3 or 4 people mention it. I had no idea. I don't watch John Oliver. I don't know why anyone watches John Oliver.
Let's watch it right now. How about that? Let's watch it right now.
All right, fine.
Here's the clip. Andy, pull that up.
Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren have put out versions of Medicare for all, but other Democrats have been much warier of it, and conservatives absolutely hate the idea.
We cannot afford Medicare for all. This is the end of America as we know it economically.
I think literally 90% of hospitals would go under tomorrow.
Right. So, Medicare for all. I lived in England, Sean. Nationalized healthcare is a disaster. When rich, famous people get sick, they don't fly to Canada, they don't fly to Cuba. They come here because we have the best medicine in the world.
All right, got it. So, yeah, I mean, again, everything sounds crazy when you have people.
Yeah, that's hilarious, man.
So, yeah. so, all right, let's just jump into it. So the first real segment, he goes through and basically pieces of data that just kind of reveal how terrible and broken the healthcare system is in America. He points to there's 27.5 million people that are uninsured. Again, this is after Obamacare. 43.8 million people who are underinsured. So these are people with premiums that are extremely expensive or deductibles that are so high that basically makes their insurance not worth using. And then he starts going into like just really terrible stories about like people that are failing to raise money for serious medical needs with like GoFundMe accounts. And he tries to make it funny, and it's really not. So Justin, I mean, do you argue that the current system that we have in America is perfect?
Thanks for that softball question, Donnie. I need a softball question every once in a while. The answer is no. I'm not arguing the current system is perfect. And I do think that, in fact, I think it's a total disaster. And I think that one of the biggest problems here, and this is a success, this is a marketing success for people on the left. They have convinced everybody that there are two options here. We either keep things exactly the same as they are now with all the problems that we have, or we put the government in charge of everything. Those are your two options. Or I guess the third option is we don't necessarily put the government in charge of everything, but we create a public option and provide people with the ability to do that if they want to buy into the public option. And eventually, of course, that ends up in the same place as single payer healthcare because they'll drive everybody out of business. And then that's it. Those are our only choices. When in reality, there are all sorts of ways to fix the current system. The current system is broken in large part because of the government. The government has totally and completely screwed this system up, and they've been doing it for decades and decades and decades and decades. And this is not an opinion. This is a well-documented empirical fact. They have completely screwed it up. And if we needed any more proof, any more evidence at all, and really the most basic, simple argument against single-payer healthcare is that just look at the promises that the Democrats made when Barack Obama was pitching Obamacare. Just look at all the promises these same people made when they voted for Obamacare, when they were promoting Obamacare, when they told us that Obamacare was going to make health insurance more affordable. In fact, the average family was going to save $2,400, we were told. There would be nobody without health insurance. Everyone would have health insurance. There would be basically no one without health insurance coverage. That health insurance would be more affordable, more accessible than ever before. You would have more options. If you like your doctor, you can keep your doctor. If you like your health insurance plan, you can keep your health insurance plan. None of these things happened.
Right.
So we just had this whole gigantic policy disaster. And now these same people are making these even grander promises. And they're saying, you know what, the current system is broken. 48 million or whatever the number is that they always use of people are uninsured or underinsured. Because of, as Donnie said, the deductibles and all these other things are so high. Why are they so high? Because they went up dramatically after Obamacare. In many cases, they doubled after Obamacare. Lots of people lost their doctors after Obamacare. Health insurance, premiums, deductibles, all the cost-sharing mechanisms all became significantly more expensive. There are fewer health insurance options today than there were prior to Obamacare. So in many counties in the country, you only have one or two choices.
Yeah.
So the idea that we should trust these people on this after they just failed spectacularly on Obamacare is laughable. It's totally laughable.
Well, I do want to get to again, just address some of his actual single points that he has a little bit later. But I think what you're saying here is just extremely important. And it's just when we're constantly on the one side of the aisle, just pushing back about why these ideas, Medicare for all, is terrible. Then it's just I think people just default us into thinking that we're content with the status quo. And like the primary that's going on, yes, they do some climate change talk, but a large portion of it is dedicated to Medicare for all. They did that segment in the debate on Wednesday before they did anything with climate change. And it's basically just like two sides talking about which version of their Medicare for all is better. So it's like, again, when you're only hearing that one side, you think the other side just wants to leave it how it is. So,
right. And just really quickly, since I didn't actually present any policy alternative,
well, that's what I was gonna throw it to you, because I think when people are pushed desperate enough, they'll just go with the solution that's being proposed, which in this case is we'll just let the government take care of all of it. So before we get into some of the specifics of the rest of the John Oliver clip, just give us the elevator pitch. You did like a pretty extended segment on this in a more recent episode of the podcast, but yes, let's hear some real free market, conservative, libertarian, free market ideas here.
Right. So the biggest thing is you need to make health insurance significantly more affordable for everybody. And there's all sorts of ways to do that, of course, but the biggest way to do it is to open up the marketplace. One of the biggest ways, open up the marketplace so that people can buy health insurance across state lines. That's a very easy thing that people have been talking about for a very long time. So you make the market a lot larger by doing that. You need to refine the system so that your health insurance doesn't come from your employer directly, but rather you can receive maybe money in a health savings account or something from your employer, and then you purchase the health insurance plan yourself. They also need to, that way, the reason why you do that is that if you lose your job, you don't lose your health insurance. So that solves the pre-existing conditions problem for a whole lot of people, for tens of millions of people. That would eliminate that issue. Allow people to buy group health insurance plans, any group of people, not just people who work for a company, but any group of people anywhere in the country to buy it as a group. That will allow those people to have a lot more negotiating power when they go to buy health insurance plans, rather than just going up there as an individual and trying to buy it. That also will help alleviate the pre-existing conditions problem. So you've basically done away with that by doing that. And if you have charitable groups doing this, then it will allow people, say at a church, to buy it as a group and allow low-income people to buy into it. And the rest of the group, just as a charitable action, will help those people out by buying the health insurance as a group. So you help alleviate some of that issue as well. You also need to make health care more affordable, not just health insurance. One of the easiest ways to do that is to cut out health insurance from all of the processes that are unnecessary. Most of primary care is you don't need to have a health insurance company involved in that. They're unnecessarily driving up costs dramatically by being involved in that. So when you go to a primary care doctor, you shouldn't have to use your health insurance to just see the doctor or get vaccinations or do a physical or blood work or basic things like that. You should be able to pay for that out of pocket, or you should be able to have a direct primary care plan, which allows you to pay a monthly fee to a primary care doctor directly, so that you cut out the health insurance middleman and lower costs, the same way that people go to a mechanic and they don't use their car insurance when they need an oil change, right? Because that would unnecessarily drive up the cost. In many states, you actually cannot do that with doctors. In most places, you can't do that with doctors directly. So you cut that out. We also need significantly more doctors. We need significantly more healthcare providers. We need to unleash that market force. We have this great need for more healthcare providers, and yet we have no way to provide for those. We have no way to get that under the current system. So we need to dramatically increase the number of doctors, dramatically increase the number of nurse practitioners and other mid-level healthcare providers, physicians assistants, etc. Allow those people to provide more care directly in a primary care context, so that you don't need to see a doctor to get a physical, for instance. You can do that with a nurse practitioner instead. There's all sorts of other things that we could do to expand health savings accounts, take Medicaid and turn that into a health savings account program, so that people don't have to have garbage health insurance under Medicaid, but instead they get money into a health savings account, and then they can take that money and go and buy a real health insurance plan themselves. And then as they make more money, instead of just losing access to health insurance, which is what happens right now if you're on Medicaid, You can instead, the amount of money you get from the government in a Medicaid type program would be slowly reduced on a sliding scale as you make more money, so that you can work your way out of poverty without losing access to your healthcare coverage. I could go on and on and on. The point is, there are a lot of ideas out there to solve this problem that don't involve putting the government, which can't run anything at all, in charge of the most important part of our economy, arguably.
Does it surprise you that none of those things are mentioned in this segment with John Oliver?
It does not.
No. Not one of them.
Not one of them.
Yeah. So what else is interesting, as you were saying all of that, the way he talks about Medicare for all is basically the exact opposite of all of the things that you just said there. So let's see. So he goes through and basically just wants to look at the policy, not the politics of the proposal. A man after my own heart. But he says there's three major criticisms that are routinely brought up when talking about Medicare for all. The first one being the cost. So he plays a clip of someone saying that it'll cost $32 trillion. I think Elizabeth Warren's plan is like $50 trillion. He acknowledges that it's expensive, but says that employers won't have to pay for the insurance and individuals won't have to pay for their premiums or deductibles. He says, would this all even out? Nobody could possibly know, he says. And then he points to estimates that have been done on the subject. So, Andy, I do have a chart here, if you could pull that up. So this chart was compiled by the New York Times, and it basically shows a variety of different, he's got a slightly different version of this chart, but basically he just recreated it. But as you can see here, if you're watching on YouTube, it's got a number of different estimates. He says that some of them say that we'll save money by doing this. Some of them are roughly in the middle, and some of them suggest that we're going to be paying a whole lot more for healthcare in this country. So I just wanted to look through this a little bit, because the Friedman one, the estimate is, that's obviously the big short one there. And I was thinking, like, who's Friedman, right? Is this Milton Friedman, the legendary economist? No, it's not. Is it Milton's son, David? No, it's not. Is it Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's least favorite economist, John Maynard Freeman? Yeah, you like that. No, it's not. It's this man. I got another picture. Pull that one up. Gerald Friedman, who is a Karl Marx lookalike. And he is the author of State Making and Labor Movements and Remaking the Labor Movement, Restoring Means to Ends in a Democratic Labor Movement. So this is a clearly unbiased estimate that's thrown into this to just show that, it's basically a wash when you're looking at estimates, so that, that I thought was very, that was loser behavior, John Oliver. Come on. What are you doing there? But again, pull up that chart again. So if you were to take that out, we're basically left with people saying that we're going to be spending about the same or more on it. And then even when we're looking at the one that's about the same, the Mercatus one, right? We've talked about this study a lot. Mercatus is a right-leaning libertarian group. But their study basically showed, and correct me if I'm wrong here, Justin, but their study was basically like just taking Bernie Sanders' word for everything, just giving him the absolute benefit of the doubt on all of his projections here, and that it would still cost $32 trillion in additional healthcare spending.
Right.
Go ahead.
Yeah. And I think going back to the clip where they should, because I was actually talking about this in the clip that they played in the John Oliver segment that we were just playing. The reason why I say that 90% of healthcare facilities, 90% of hospitals could go under Medicare for All is because under Bernie Sanders' Medicare for All plan, at least the one that he put out at the time that the Mercatus Center study came out that we're showing right here, it assumed a Medicare reimbursement rate that is in line. It assumed a reimbursement rate that's in line with current Medicare reimbursement rates,
right? Which
pay less, significantly less, much less than what you get in the private sector, and much less, in fact, than the cost of care. So so in other words, you only get like 90 cents on the dollar for every Medicare patient that you treat at a hospital. That's what a hospital gets, 90 cents on the dollar. That means it costs them money on average to treat someone on Medicare. It costs them money because the government's paying them less money than what it actually costs for treatment. So how do they make that up? By charging you, if you have a private health insurance plan, more money, People who have private health insurance pay more money in order to offset the losses that they're getting on Medicare and Medicaid patients at hospitals and other healthcare facilities. So if everybody is getting paid a reimbursement rate that's in line with current Medicare reimbursement rates, then everybody basically is losing money. That's how it would work. Yeah. So there are some people who might make a little more because some people treat more or less Medicare patients right now, and they're going to do some cost readjustments and all of this other stuff in order to try to account for that. But the bottom line is, unless hospitals and doctors take massive pay cuts, unless they slash healthcare spending, and that's what would happen under this whole system, everyone would go under. The vast majority of doctors, hospitals, et cetera, would not be able to function properly. They would have to slash spending in order to survive. And that's the whole point.
Yeah, and just really quickly going back to that chart, like the other organizations that are shown there, one, the Rand Institute, that's saying that it's going to be more. They're like a pretty centrist organization. And the Urban Institute is a very liberal organization, and they've got the least generous projection of how much this is going to cost. So just factoring those things in, yeah, I think we could safely say that let's cross out the Gerald Freeman one on the bottom and say, yeah, it's going to cost a whole lot more. But to Justin's point there, I have a piece from Sally Pipes with the Pacific Research Institute, and she basically said it's an article that's titled "Medicare for All Could Mean Doctors for None." And she says that some of the same things that you were just talking there, Justin. A single payer program would pay doctors at rates similar to Medicare reimbursement levels, already at least 25% less than private insurance pays, according to estimates by Charles Blauhaus of the Mercatus Center. Under the current legislative drafts of Medicare for All, government rates over the first decade would be 40% lower than those paid by private insurers. So 60 cents on the dollar. This amounts to enormous pay cuts for doctors. U.S. physicians earned on average $313,000 in 2019. The average physician in the UK earned about $138,000. The Commonwealth Fund reports that American general practitioners earned a little more than $218,000 on average in 2016, compared to $146,000 in Canada and $134,000 in the UK. So she goes on to explain how this exacerbates the doctor shortage that we're already experiencing here in the United States, how it's going to basically drive people to retirement. People are going to get out of the practice, and that's also going to discourage people from entering the practice in the first place. So again, the solutions that John Oliver and people that are on the stage at that debate, that the solutions that Justin's presenting, that those people think just don't exist. The solutions that are being discussed here are going to do the opposite of what Justin is suggesting here. So let's move on because the cost is ridiculous. He also says that there's not going to be any administrative costs, which is just ridiculous to me because the last time the government ran something efficiently, I don't even remember. And then he also says, and feel free to respond to this, and Jim, feel free to jump in if you want, that government monopoly would put the government in a better position to negotiate costs.
Absolutely wrong. Look, the Heartland Institute is a free market think tank. We promote the ideas that markets, free people making free choices in a very complex economic system that is capitalism, make the right choices over time, and actually not even over that much time. And the fact of the matter is, and Justin will correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm not wrong, and it is that the healthcare system in the United States has very little free market pressure on it whatsoever. And the laws of supply and demand do not disappear just because you want them to in the healthcare space. And so these things matter, they exist, they are real. So you have some choices here when it comes to the supply of doctors, for instance, which is part of what you just had up there on the screen. When doctors are not going to be compensated well enough to pay for their medical school educations and everything else, you're going to end up with fewer of them. When you have more people being able to get "quote unquote" free healthcare, it puts a demand pressure on a service like healthcare that cannot be supplied. So you end up with rationing. And the idea that we can just eliminate administrative costs by a wave of a pen, that's not going to happen. The government cannot plan this out. We need more real, true free market pressures on the healthcare system. You see these things happening on the edges. I actually saw a story, I think a week ago, about a guy who decided to set up basically an MRI service, kind of walk-in MRI service. So you go to a doctor and he says, yeah, your knee is a little bit weird. We're going to need an MRI on that. And he says, oh, I got the plan. I'm going to go down the street. I'm going to go to this guy. I'm going to pay him $300 out of my health savings account to get that MRI. He's going to print it out for me, and I'm going to bring it back. I'll be back in half an hour. These things are happening, and that's one way to reduce costs. But you can't centrally organize the healthcare system to make it cheap enough for everybody. You need free market pressures into this healthcare system in order to reduce cost. Every other industry works this way. Just think about the airline industry. Airline tickets used to be very expensive. I'm almost 50 years old. When I was a kid, it was a very special thing in the early 70s to get on an airplane. A lot of people I knew had never flown anywhere before. The airline industries were deregulated, prices came plummeting down to earth, and now everybody flies on planes. These basic laws of economics and supply and demand are real, and they apply to healthcare. We need to get the government out of the way and let the free market come in and set these prices and costs for everybody.
Yes. I mean, we know that free markets or whatever with supply and demand price signals, that is what reduces price and encourages competition. Putting the government in charge of everything removes all of those price signals, and basically it turns everything into politics. And what do politicians like to do most when it comes to solving problems? Just shoveling bucket loads of money into it. So we're not going to see them negotiate for lower costs. We're just going to see more and more money being dumped into it every year, basically. So yeah, the idea that that we could potentially save money on this is preposterous. But yes.
Right. Well, and it turns every association of doctors and everything in the whole country into basically another government union that's demanding higher wages and more benefits, and that there's a political reason now to make sure that those people are happy and to not cut their costs, and you'll have doctors striking and all kinds of crazy things. Like, that's going to be the reality that we live in. Yeah. And I'll just leave it at that because
So let's get to the next point here, which is when he goes into wait times. And this is perfectly set up by when Jim was talking about that, which if you are going to limit spending on it, it's going to result in rationing, or in the context of healthcare, nationalized healthcare, that means wait times. So he glibly compares wait times to waiting in line at Trader Joe's so that you can get groceries or something. I've never been to Trader Joe's. Is that like a rich person's grocery store? Oh, is it really? Okay, cool.
It's not that rich. It's hipster.
Okay, hipster, whatever. So he says that people are waiting in America, and whether this is like people waiting to pay or, basically, waiting for certain services. And he claims that he basically transitions out of that and says that claims that people love their healthcare system in the UK and in Canada. And as proof of this, he points to the literal propaganda in the UK, where during the London Olympics in 2012, where they did a massive singing and dancing event to celebrate the National Health Service. This was an actual thing where they had people dressed as doctors, dancing around. They had sick kids trampolining on hospital beds. It was the most Orwellian dystopian thing I have ever seen in real life. It was creepy, but he uses that as an example how people actually love their healthcare system in the UK and in Canada.
Yeah, just real quick, because this is something I hear all the time from people all the time. This is one of the number one defenses of this. Well, yeah, was so-and-so I know who's from, Canada. They love their health insurance. It's first of all, that's the least scientific way to argue any problem ever. To just say, well, I know somebody who's from there and they say that they like it. Well, I know people who are from there who say that it sucks. So which one of us is right? I mean, it's such a stupid thing. But the other thing to keep in mind is that a lot of people don't go to the doctor very often. Okay. I don't go to the doctor. I hardly ever go to the doctor. Hardly ever. I never go practically. Right. And so for me, if I lived in England and I didn't pay attention to this sort of stuff and somebody walked up to me and I don't really go to the doctor that often and someone said, do you like the health insurance system here? Or you like the healthcare system? I'd say, yeah, sure. It's fine. Whatever. Right. Because you don't use it. where the real issue, and if all you need to do is go to the doctor because you need a physical or you need a vaccination or something, it's not a big deal. Of course, the government can manage that, not very well, probably, but they can do it at least. But what if you have a real serious problem? See, that's where the issue comes into play. If you have cancer, for instance, you're more likely to die in these countries than you are in the United States. Did they ever talk about that? That the life expectancy for someone with cancer in Canada is lower than it is in the United States? It's lower in the United Kingdom than it is in the United States. You're more likely to die from these things. You're not surviving. If you have a serious heart condition, your wait times in places like Canada are significantly longer, which means you're more likely to die. If you have serious health problems that need serious attention from an actual specialist, you are much worse off in these countries. Now, it's true, if you don't have health insurance and you're in America, then yeah, it's a huge problem for you. There's no question about that. And we want to fix that problem. But that's the idea that we have, again, going back to that issue we talked about before, the idea that it's either people dying in the streets or put the government in charge of everything is a lie. That is not the debate that we're actually having. It's a difference between improving the system we have now so that everyone can have access to care, or putting the government that can't run trains and the postal service effectively in charge of everything in the healthcare system.
Well, I'm gonna let you do the final word on this topic, but the third thing that he brings up is the idea of choice. So this the criticism, I guess, is that once you put government in charge, you can't pick your own doctors or hospitals. So then he says that the system isn't good right now when it comes to choice, and he presents a scenario where a person is in an emergency situation and has to go to a hospital that's specifically in their network, or else their insurance won't cover it. And then he continues to explain how nobody likes dealing with their health, their insurance company or anything like that, or having to get like open enrollment or whatever. And okay, I will agree with him on this. Nobody likes that. So again, Justin, final words on this. Feel free to wrap it up here before we end the episode.
Yeah, again, there are significant problems with the current system. Nobody is denying that. The current system is a creature of the government, which has been running healthcare for decades and decades and decades. It's their regulations that have created the system that we have now. It's their tax code that has created the system we have now. They are the ones controlling the system. The idea that we have a free market healthcare system is a lie. We have a healthcare system that has some market elements to it, but it's mostly controlled by the government. That we have thousands and thousands of regulations related to healthcare across the country. We have all sorts of controls that prevent you from being able to just open up a healthcare facility whenever you want. And most people don't realize that even if you're a billionaire, a multi-billionaire, or a company with billions of dollars, and you want to open up a hospital somewhere because you think there should be a hospital there, you can't do that. If you're an existing hospital and you want to add an MRI machine, you've got 4 and you think you need 5, you can't do that. You have to get permission from the government first. If you want to add beds to your nursing home, in many states, you can't do that without asking permission from the government, which often says no. So the idea that how can anyone construe that as being anything other than a system controlled by the government? So if this system is failing, it's failing because the government is in charge of it, just as the VA healthcare system is failing, and that's totally run by the government. Why don't they start there? If they actually can fix all of our healthcare problems, why don't they start there? That's something that they've already have total control over, and it's a joke. It's a disaster. It's a complete failure, and yet they are in charge of it. And they take no responsibility for it. They totally ignore that problem. And instead they say, you know what, let's take over everything so that everything becomes like the VA healthcare system. Please, people, if you think that the government should be running healthcare, just look at the things that they're running now and ask yourselves, are they capable? If they can't run, again, Amtrak, they can't run the Postal Service, they can't run DMVs, they can't run anything without making it a completely miserable experience. Why would you want them in charge of your brain surgery or your heart surgery or your life? Why would you want to do that?
Yeah.
I agree there has to be a better way than what we have right now, But that better way is not putting the most dysfunctional, incapable, incompetent people on the face of the planet in charge of the most important part of our society.
Let's end it there, folks. Let's end it there. Forget we don't have any time, so I can't do the proposed bill of the week, but that was fantastically put. Jim, I would ask you what you're watching today, but you'd say some terrible, mediocre, like 2-decade-old show, so I'm going to bypass that.
Okay.
Just
That's
end
fine.
the episode for today. Thank you all for those who are tuned in. Thank you all for joining us for this episode of In the Tank. Please join us every Friday for a new episode of In the Tank. If you like our show, please subscribe, write a review for us on iTunes. Audio listeners, check us out on YouTube. You could put the voice to a face now. If you'd like, you can follow us on Twitter at In the Tank Pod. Send us your comments, suggestions, questions, anecdotes, jokes, suggestions by emailing us at inthethankpodcast@gmail.com. Justin, where can the fine people find you?
At Justin T. Haskins on Facebook and Twitter, and go to stoppingsocialism.com.
Oh, yes, the most important thing. Yeah, follow us on Facebook, too. Also, Jim Likely, where can the fine people find you?
At Jay Lakely on Twitter, also at Heartland Inst for the Heartland Institute. And hey, one of the bonuses of watching the podcast on YouTube is that you can leave comments below and we will read them and respond.
Yeah, that one goes out to you, Coach Mendoza. Thank you for tuning in this week. We'll talk to you next week. Have a good one.